turkey was already getting cold. The mashed potatoes had spilled onto the edge of the plate, and their car disappeared down the street without a second glance. I wish I could tell you that was the first time they made me feel invisible. It wasn't. My name is Emily, and for most of my life I was the child who was expected to understand everything. My sister Rachel was the favorite. If Rachel forgot someone's birthday, everyone laughed. If I made one mistake, I heard about it for weeks. When Rachel dropped out of college, my parents called her brave for following her heart. When I worked 2 jobs to finish my degree, they barely congratulated me. I kept telling myself that someday things would change. That if I worked harder, if I became kinder, if I gave more, maybe they'd finally see me. Instead, I became the family's emergency contact, free babysitter, unpaid helper, and invisible daughter. Still, I never stopped trying. Every Thanksgiving I cooked desserts. Every Christmas I bought thoughtful gifts. Every birthday I showed up early to decorate. Because deep down I still wanted one thing, to feel like I belonged. That Thanksgiving morning started like every other year. Mom called me. "Emily, could you make your pumpkin pie? Everyone loves yours." Of course I said yes. I spent hours baking. I even brought homemade bread and cranberry sauce. When I arrived, Rachel's car was already there. She hugged Mom dramatically. "I'm starving." Everyone laughed. No one even noticed I was carrying 3 heavy dishes by myself. As I walked inside, Dad looked uncomfortable. "Emily, can we talk for a second?" Something about his voice made my stomach tighten. "We're a little short on space this year." I blinked. "What do you mean?" Rachel crossed her arms. "My boyfriend came unexpectedly." Mom smiled awkwardly. "You understand, sweetheart." I looked around the dining room. There were empty folding chairs against the wall. More than enough room. "We already decided," Dad interrupted. "We'll bring you a plate." For a moment I honestly thought they were joking. Then Mom gently took my desserts from my hands. Rachel sat down in my usual chair, and Dad walked me back toward the front door. I stood frozen. "You want me to leave?" He avoided my eyes. "It's only this once." But what I didn't know that day was that being left outside would become the moment that changed my entire life. I sat on the porch for nearly 15 minutes. Part of me kept hoping the front door would open, that someone would say they had made a terrible mistake. Instead, Mom stepped outside, carrying a paper plate. She smiled as if everything was normal. "Happy Thanksgiving, honey." She placed the plate beside me. Then she hurried back inside. A few minutes later, everyone climbed into 2 cars. Rachel wanted to show her boyfriend the fancy restaurant downtown where they planned to have dessert. No one asked if I wanted to come. No one even looked back. I watched the taillights disappear. Then I cried harder than I ever had. Not because I missed dinner, because I finally accepted something I had been denying for years. I wasn't being treated like family. I was being tolerated. That realization broke something inside me. But sometimes, the hardest truth becomes the beginning of your freedom. Instead of driving home, I called my best friend Hannah. The moment she answered, she knew something was wrong. "Emily, where are you?" I laughed through my tears. On my parents' porch. 30 minutes later, she arrived with her husband. They didn't ask questions. They simply wrapped me in a blanket and took me home with them. Their family welcomed me as though I'd always belonged there. Her grandmother hugged me tightly. "Every table has room for one more." Those words healed something I didn't know could heal. That night, Hannah quietly asked, "Emily, why do you keep chasing people who never choose you?" I couldn't answer, because she was right. Over the next few weeks, I stopped being available every time my parents called. I stopped paying Rachel's bills. I stopped babysitting for free. I stopped organizing birthdays. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. The phone calls started almost immediately. "Emily, can you pick up Rachel's kids?" "No." "Can you host Christmas?" "No." "Can you lend Rachel some money?" "No." The silence after each answer felt strange. Then the guilt arrived, but I didn't give in. Without me quietly fixing everything, the cracks in the family became impossible to hide. Rachel missed appointments. Dad forgot birthdays. Mom became overwhelmed. The person they had always depended on was suddenly gone. And that's when their attitude began to change. Not because they finally appreciated me, because they finally noticed everything I had been doing all along. Then, 2 months after Thanksgiving, I received an invitation. "Family dinner, we need to talk." I almost didn't go, but something inside me wanted answers. I had no idea. Everything was about to change. When I arrived, the house felt unusually quiet. No television, no laughter, just my parents sitting at the dining table. Rachel wasn't there. Dad stood up first. His eyes looked tired. "We owe you an apology." I stayed silent. Mom began crying. She admitted that for years they had expected me to understand every unfair decision because I was the responsible one. Rachel demanded attention. I quietly handled everything, so they kept rewarding the loudest voice instead of the kindest heart. Dad looked down. "Leaving you outside on Thanksgiving, it was the worst decision we've ever made." I finally asked the question that had lived inside me for years. "Would you have done that to Rachel?" Neither of them answered, because they couldn't. Their silence told me everything. A week later, I learned something surprising. Rachel had stopped speaking to our parents after they refused to continue supporting her financially. The daughter they had always protected simply walked away. Meanwhile, the daughter they had ignored was the only one still willing to listen. Not because I owed them forgiveness, but because forgiveness was for my own peace. I didn't pretend nothing happened. I didn't suddenly become the family helper again. Instead, I created boundaries. If they wanted a relationship with me, it had to be built on respect, not guilt. Slowly, things began to change. Mom started calling just to ask how I was doing. Dad visited my apartment with coffee instead of requests. For the first time, they wanted to know me, not just what I could do for them. Months later, Thanksgiving came around again. This time, I hosted dinner, not because anyone expected me to, because I wanted to. My table wasn't the biggest, the decorations weren't perfect, but every chair was filled with people who genuinely wanted to be there. Before we started eating, Hannah's grandmother smiled at me. "Every table has room for one more." I smiled back because I finally understood what she had meant. Family isn't defined by who shares your last name. It's defined by who makes room for you when your heart feels empty. Looking back now, I don't remember the cold turkey on that paper plate. I remember the lesson hidden inside that painful day. The people who leave you outside are showing you exactly where you stand. Believe them. Then build a life where you never have to beg for a seat at anyone else's table again. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making people suffer. It's creating a life so full of love, peace, and self-respect that the people who once overlooked you finally realize what they lost. And by then, you no longer need their approval. You've already found your place.